Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born in the time of All Might's youth. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Muzutsufu had a personality of its own. It wasn't the gentle, cleansing shower of pastoral poems or the dramatic downpour of cinema. It was a gritty, persistent drizzle that seemed to seep into the very bones of the city, dissolving the day's grime into a slick, reflective sheen on the asphalt. It was the kind of rain that made the lurid glow of neon signs bleed across wet pavement, turning alleys into abstract paintings of crimson and electric blue. Steam ghosted from sewer grates, smelling of damp concrete and something vaguely metallic, mingling with the exhaust from passing vehicles. This was the world Izuku Midoriya knew. Not the bright, hopeful future that hero comics promise, but this, the messy, chaotic present of the early Quirk era. A world still blinking in the harsh, new light of superhuman abilities, struggling to draw a line between marvel and menace. For Izuku, age 14, the rain was a meager shield. It plastered his unruly green hair to his forehead and soaked through the thin fabric of his school uniform jacket, but it did little to deter the three figures cornering him against the graffiti-scarred brick wall of a narrow side street. "Nowhere left to run, blank," sneered the leader, Kenji Tanaka. His quirk was unimpressive by any real hero standard, but brutally effective in a schoolyard hierarchy. Tiny, sharp pebbles perpetually flaked off his skin, and with a flick of his wrist, he could send them stinging like hornets. One of them had already raised a red welt on Izuku's cheek. The term blank was crueler than quirkless, and far more common these days. It implied not just an absence, but a fundamental defect. A canvas with no picture. A page with no words. In a world defined by what extraordinary thing you could do, to do nothing was to be nothing. "I don't want any trouble, Tanaka-kun," Izuku said, his voice small but steady. He kept his eyes down, a learned habit of non-confrontation. His worn yellow backpack, heavy with notebooks and textbooks, felt like a turtle's shell, offering the illusion of protection. Too late for that. One of Kenji's cronies, a lanky boy who could stretch his fingers an extra 6 inches, snickered. He jabbed one of his unnaturally long digits into Izuku's shoulder. "We saw you at the library again. Scribbling in that creepy notebook of yours. What's in there, huh?" Kenji stepped closer, a cloud of rock dust swirling around his ankles. "Analyzing heroes? You think you can understand them? You're not even on the same playing field, blank. You're not even in the game." Izuku's hands tightened into fists at his sides. That notebook was his sanctuary. It was the one place where his supposed defect didn't matter. In its pages, quirks were not tools of intimidation, but systems to be understood, catalogued, and analyzed. He could break down a hero's fighting style, theorize their weaknesses, and diagram their support gear with a clarity that even his teachers had grudgingly called exceptional. But to them, it was a useless, obsessive hobby. An unsettling fixation from someone who should have long since accepted his place at the bottom. "It's just a hobby," Izuku mumbled, pressing himself flatter against the cold, wet brick. Kenji laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Let's see it." He lunged for the backpack. Instinct, honed by years of similar encounters, took over. Izuku didn't fight, he thought. He had catalogued this alley 3 weeks ago. Pattern recognition. Environmental analysis. Kenji's lunge was predictable. The footing here was slick with a patch of moss. The grate to his left was loose. The timing of the traffic light at the end of the alley was on a 90-second cycle, and it was due to turn green in 5, 4, 3. As Kenji's hand clamped onto his backpack strap, Izuku didn't pull away. He went with it, using the momentum to spin on his heel. His worn sneaker deliberately stomped on the edge of the loose iron grate. It tilted with a loud clang, creating a momentary obstacle. Kenji stumbled, his ankle twisting, his grip on the backpack lost. 2 seconds. Izuku was already moving. He sprinted, his small frame nimble. He didn't run in a straight line but darted toward the street, his mind a flurry of calculations. The delivery truck that always parked here at 4:15 p.m. was 3 feet further back than usual. The puddle by the dumpster was deeper than it looked. A void. He skidded around the corner just as the light turned green. A river of cars flowed past, cutting off his pursuers. He didn't stop running for another 3 blocks, the sound of their furious shouts swallowed by the city's cacophony. He finally ducked into the hushed, hallowed halls of the Municipal Library, his chest heaving, rain and sweat mingling on his face. The librarian at the front desk, a kind elderly woman with a minor telekinetic quirk she used to reshelf books on the top shelf, gave him a gentle, knowing smile. "The usual, Midoriya-kun?" she asked softly. He just nodded, catching his breath, the adrenaline slowly draining away to be replaced by a familiar, hollow ache. He made his way to the back corner, to the section housing the archives, and sat down at his favorite microfiche reader. This was his real escape. The musty smell of old paper and the low, mechanical whir of the machine were a balm to his frayed nerves. He threaded the reel of film into the reader, the plastic cool against his fingertips, and the world of bullies and rain-soaked alleys dissolved, replaced by the glowing green and black text of a newspaper from 7 years ago. Heroine Nana Shimura falls in battle. A nation mourns. Izuku's fingers traced the grainy image of the woman on the screen. She was floating, or flying, her quirk was never officially confirmed, with a wide, brilliant smile that seemed to defy the monochrome print. Even in this crude format, her charisma was palpable. She was one of the greats from the second generation of heroes, a beacon of hope in a time when the public was still deeply suspicious of those with powerful quirks. He pulled his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 5, from his backpack. He ignored the dampness of the cover and flipped it open to a well-worn section. His own meticulous drawings of Nana Shimura filled the page, cross-referenced with every public account of her fights. Quirk unknown. Presumed flight/enhanced strength combination. Note: public statements emphasize hope and smiling. Was this a conscious strategy? A way to combat public fear? Her fighting style seems to prioritize civilian safety above all else, often taking hits to shield others. A stark contrast to heroes like Eruptor who cause massive property damage. He made a new note, his pen scratching quietly in the silent library. Rereading witness accounts of her final battle. Reports are contradictory. Some mention a single, overwhelming foe. Police reports are heavily redacted. Mention of unprecedented quirk singularity. Alpha, he stopped. That was the name he'd seen whispered in obscure online forums, a boogeyman of the quirk underworld. A name that never appeared in official news but was a shadow clinging to the edges of every major hero tragedy. It was a dead end, a conspiracy theory, but his analytical mind couldn't let it go. He switched reels, moving on to another of his subjects, Gran Torino. The hero was a contemporary of Nana's, but far more enigmatic. Short, wizened, and famously crotchety, his public appearances were rare. Hero name, Gran Torino. Quirk, Jet. Propels himself by shooting air from the soles of his feet. Extremely high mobility. Fighting style is erratic, ricocheting off surfaces. Unpredictable. But is it just erratic? Or is it a feint? Video analysis shows his trajectory changes are too precise for simple chaos. He's creating confusing attack vectors. Is it to bypass defensive quirks? Or to disorient opponents who rely on predicting movement? This was where Izuku thrived. Not in the face of power, but in the deconstruction of it. He believed, with an almost religious fervor, that understanding was its own kind of strength. If he could just analyze enough, learn enough, maybe he could find a way to contribute. A way to stand on the same field, even if he could never play the same game. He was so engrossed that he didn't notice the library emptying, the sky outside darkening from a slate gray to an inky, bruised purple. The librarian's gentle tap on his shoulder startled him. "Closing time, dear," she said, her voice soft. "The rain's letting up a bit, but you should hurry home." Izuku blinked, looking at the clock. 7 p.m. He'd been there for nearly 3 hours. He packed his things, a faint blush on his cheeks, and thanked her before stepping back out into the damp evening. The rain had indeed softened to a fine mist, but the air was heavy, charged with a strange energy. It was then that the first siren began to wail, a lonely cry that was quickly joined by another, and then another, until the air was thick with their overlapping chorus. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, painting the low-hanging clouds in strobing colors. Trouble. Big trouble. His route home would take him near the central commercial district. The smart thing to do was to take the long way around. The safe thing. But the pull was irresistible. It was the same magnetic force that drew him to his notebooks, the insatiable curiosity of the analyst, the breathless awe of the fan. He had to see. He had to know. He jogged toward the commotion, staying in the shadows of buildings, his heart thudding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. As he got closer, the scene of organized chaos resolved into terrifying detail. The main plaza, usually bustling with evening shoppers, was a war zone. Cars were overturned, their alarms blaring a dissonant symphony. Twisted metal girders, torn from a nearby construction site, formed jagged barricades. Shards of glass from shattered storefronts glittered like dangerous frost on the wet ground. At the center of it all was a man who looked like he was made of scrap and rage. He was large and brutish, wearing torn cargo pants and a welding mask pushed up on his forehead. Pieces of metal, pipes, rebar, street signs, orbited him in a slow, menacing vortex. This had to be the villain. Izuku ducked behind a large concrete planter, peering through the decorative shrubs. "Get back! Everyone get back!" A hero in a blue and silver costume shouted. Izuku recognized him from a news clip, Captain Shield. His quirk allowed him to generate small, durable discs of energy. Right now, 3 of them were hovering in front of him, already cracked and flickering under the assault of metal projectiles the villain was flinging. The villain, who the news crews were already calling Scrap Heap, laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Your pathetic shields can't stop the march of industry. This city is built of steel and concrete, and it will be my weapon." He slammed his hand down on the hood of a crumpled taxi. The metal groaned and warped, peeling away to join his swirling arsenal. Izuku's mind went into overdrive, his fear momentarily shoved aside by the thrill of analysis. Quirk, ferrokinesis? No, too broad. He seems to be limited to ferrous metals. Range appears to be about 50 meters. Observation. He physically touched the taxi before controlling it. Did he do the same with the girders? I couldn't see. Need more data. The handful of pro-heroes on the scene were hopelessly outmatched. Captain Shield was purely defensive. Another hero, a woman who could shoot jets of high-pressure water from her palms, was only succeeding in making the metal rustier. They were pioneers, brave but limited, their quirks often singular in application and ill-suited for this scale of destruction. They were holding the line, but barely. Scrap Heap seemed to be toying with them. He wasn't going for kill shots, but was systematically dismantling the plaza, creating more and more ammunition for himself. He ripped a lamppost from its concrete mooring and sent it spearing through the window of a department store. The screams from inside were sharp with terror, and then, everything changed. There was no grand announcement. No heroic cry. There was only a sound, a deafening crack like a thunderbolt striking just feet away. It was followed by a shockwave of displaced air that blasted outwards, kicking up a spray of rainwater and rattling the teeth of everyone present. A figure stood in the crater that had just been empty pavement. He was tall, but lanky, all limbs and sharp angles. He couldn't have been much older than 18 or 19. He wore a simple, dark blue tracksuit, similar to a UA gym uniform, but with reinforced plating on the knees and elbows. His hair was a shock of bright, untamable blonde, with 2 distinct tufts sticking up like antennae. But it was his face that captivated Izuku. It was a mask of grim determination. There was no smile. No reassuring confidence. His piercing blue eyes were narrowed, fixed on the villain with an intensity that was almost frightening. They held a profound sadness, a deep-seated grief that seemed at odds with the raw, untamed power radiating from him in visible waves. This wasn't a hero playing to the crowd. This was a man with a burden. "Who the hell are you?" Scrap Heap snarled, momentarily taken aback. The young man didn't answer. He just crouched, his muscles coiling like immense springs. Power, green and electric, crackled around his fists. "Another hero? You're just a kid! I'll tear you apart!" Scrap Heap roared, and with a sweep of his arm, he sent a wave of twisted metal, car doors, pipes, and rebar, hurtling toward the newcomer. The blond youth met the charge head-on. He didn't dodge. He punched. It wasn't a named attack. It was just a raw, brutal application of force. Smash! The word was a guttural roar torn from his lungs. The impact of his fist on the wave of metal was apocalyptic. The air itself seemed to shatter. The metal debris, caught in the concussive blast, was vaporized into a cloud of shrapnel that flew in every direction but forward. Windows and buildings a block away exploded outwards. The ground shook. Izuku, even behind his concrete planter, was thrown back by the force of the wind, his ears ringing. He stared, utterly dumbfounded. The power was unbelievable. It was on a scale he had only read about, a scale that defied the known limits of strength-enhancing quirks. But his analytical eye saw more than just the power. It saw the cost. The street was now a spiderweb of cracks emanating from the young hero's feet. The collateral damage from that single punch was immense, and he saw the hero himself, his right arm trembling, his knuckles white as he clenched his fist. He was struggling. The power was a wild stallion, and he was barely holding the reins. Impressive! Scrapheap grunted, his confidence shaken but not broken. He was protected by a hastily erected wall of his own metal. But you're just as reckless as the rest of them. The fight began in earnest. It was a contest of overwhelming force versus inexhaustible supply. The blonde hero was a thunderbolt, crossing the plaza in impossibly fast leaps, each landing cracking the pavement. He would lash out with another earth-shattering punch, and Scrapheap would meet it with a thick shield of compressed steel. Each impact sent shockwaves shuddering through the district. While the other heroes and civilians were mesmerized by the sheer spectacle, Izuku was watching with a different kind of intensity. His fear was now a distant hum beneath the roar of his intellect. He wasn't just watching a fight, he was dissecting it. The new hero, his power is phenomenal. One for all? No, that's a legend, a myth. But the raw energy, it's similar to descriptions of Nanashimura's power, but cruder, more volatile. He's favoring his right arm, but his left seems just as capable. Is he trying to moderate the output? Every large-scale punch seems to cause him pain. He grits his teeth. A backlash from his own quirk? He then turned his focus to the villain. Scrapheap was clever. He was keeping the hero at a distance, using the entire plaza as his weapon. He never let the hero get close enough for a clean, decisive blow. He was a master of his environment, and that's when Izuku saw it. It was a small detail, almost insignificant in the chaos. Scrapheap, needing more material, reached out and grabbed the metal frame of a broken bus stop shelter. He held it for a second, and then with a grunt, ripped it free and added it to his swirling vortex of death. A moment later, he did the same with a fallen street sign, his bare hand slapping against the pole before it twisted and joined the others. The pattern clicked into place in Izuku's mind with the satisfying certainty of a solved puzzle. He has to touch it. It wasn't telekinesis. It was some kind of contact-based activation. He could only manipulate metal he had physically come into contact with recently. How recently? A minute? 5? The taxi he touched at the beginning was still inert, crumpled on the ground. The first wave of girders was also lying dormant. It had to be a short time limit. He's not a master of the environment, Izuku realized with a jolt of adrenaline. He's a scavenger, constantly refreshing his supply. That's his weakness. He looked at the blonde hero. The young man was starting to pant, his movements becoming slightly more labored. The sheer output of energy was clearly taking its toll. Scrapheap, sensing this, pressed his advantage. With a mighty heave, he tore up a huge section of scaffolding from a nearby building and wove it, with horrifying speed, into a thick, domed cage. The cage slammed down, trapping a dozen terrified civilians who had been huddling in a department store entrance. Now, hero! Scrapheap bellowed, his voice echoing in the plaza. What will you do? Try to break my cage, and the shrapnel will shred them. Leave them, and I'll crush it flat. Your move! The blonde hero froze. He looked at the cage, then at the villain. Izuku could see the terrible dilemma on his face. He saw him clench his fist, power gathering for another cataclysmic smash. It would be a huge, unfocused blast. An area of effect attack designed to obliterate the cage and the villain in one go. But the civilians were right there. The shockwave alone, He's going to kill them, Izuku thought in a surge of pure horror. He doesn't see another way, but Izuku did. He saw the old, ornate cast-iron lamppost standing not 10 feet behind Scrapheap. It was from an older city renovation, solid and heavy, and in the entire battle, amidst all the flying debris and chaos, Scrapheap hadn't touched it once. It was inert. Just a piece of scenery, an unactivated weapon. Fear was a cold hand gripping Izuku's throat, stealing his breath. To shout was to reveal himself. To be a target. The lessons of the alleyway, of Kenji Tanaka, of a lifetime of being a nail waiting for a hammer, screamed at him to stay down, stay quiet, stay safe. But then he saw the faces of the people in the cage. The terror in their eyes. He saw the grim, desperate resolve on the young hero's face, the face of someone about to make a terrible, tragic mistake. He thought of Nana Shimura's smile, of her legacy of saving people. What was the point of all his analysis, all his knowledge, if he let it die with him behind a planter? The blonde hero's arm drew back, green lightning arcing wildly. The air grew thick and heavy. Izuku scrambled to his feet, cupped his hands around his mouth, and screamed with every ounce of air in his lungs, his voice raw and cracking. He can only control metal he's touched. The lamppost behind him, he hasn't touched it. The sound was shockingly loud in the momentary lull. It cut through the tension, thin but clear. The blonde hero, his fist inches from unleashing devastation, faltered. His head snapped around, his piercing blue eyes wide with surprise. For a split second, he looked not at the villain, not at the cage, but in the direction of the shout. His gaze swept past Izuku's hiding spot. He couldn't have seen him. But he heard him. Scrapheap heard him too. What? Who said that? He spun around, searching the shadows, but it was too late. The hero had processed it. The information, a key to an impossible lock, had been received. In that microsecond, his entire strategy pivoted. The raw, untamed power in his fist dissipated. Instead of a devastating punch, he flicked his fingers, a precise, controlled motion. A cannonball of pressurized air, no bigger than a fist, shot forward. It wasn't aimed at the villain. It was aimed at the base of the untouched lamppost. Clang! The cast iron, struck with immense force, snapped at its base. The heavy post toppled, not randomly, but in a perfect, calculated arc, directly toward the distracted Scrapheap. The villain whirled around just in time to see it coming. He threw up his hands instinctively to stop it, to command it. But nothing happened. He hadn't touched it. It was just a falling object, immune to his power. He bellowed in frustration and rage, raising a shield of his controlled metal. But the hero was already moving. He wasn't a thunderbolt now, he was a scalpel. He used the moment of distraction, the falling lamppost as cover, and closed the distance in a single, silent bound. There was no city-shaking smash. Just a single, clean punch to the villain's jaw. The sound was a dull, final thud. Scrapheap's eyes rolled back into his head, and he crumpled to the ground, his vortex of orbiting metal clattering uselessly onto the pavement around him. The silence that followed was more profound than the noise had been. The rain had stopped. The only sounds were the distant, approaching sirens and the soft sobbing of the rescued civilians. The young hero stood over the fallen villain, his chest rising and falling heavily. He looked at his fist, then at the intact cage, and then in the general direction Izuku had been. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, confusion, curiosity, relief. Izuku's heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he felt dizzy. He had done it. He had helped. The thought was so overwhelming, so intoxicating, that he almost laughed. He, the quirkless, useless Deku, had made a difference. Then the terror flooded back in. What had he done? He had shouted in the middle of a villain fight. He had involved himself. He needed to leave. Now, he pushed himself up, trying to blend into the growing crowd of onlookers and emergency personnel that were cautiously creeping into the plaza. He kept his head down, pulling the hood of his jacket up, and began to slip away, his legs shaking. He almost made it. He was at the edge of the plaza, about to melt back into the anonymity of the city's side streets. A heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. It wasn't a painful grip, but it was firm, absolute, and immovable. Izuku froze, a gasp catching in his throat. He slowly turned his head, his eyes traveling up a dark blue sleeve, over a broad shoulder, to a grim, tired face. The blonde hero stood over him, blocking out the flashing emergency lights. He was even taller up close, a towering figure of raw potential. His blue eyes, no longer filled with the fire of combat, were now sharp and impossibly focused. They weren't angry. They were intensely, unnervingly curious. A police officer rushed over. "Sir! Are you alright? We need to get a statement, your name for the..." The young hero didn't even look at him. He dismissed the officer with a short, sharp shake of his head. Later, he then turned his full attention back to the trembling, rain-soaked boy in front of him. His voice, when he spoke, was not the booming cry of a hero. It was low, raspy from exertion, and held an edge of steel that sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. "You! Stay put!" He waited a beat, letting the command sink in, his gaze pinning Izuku to the spot. Then, he leaned in slightly, his expression a mixture of suspicion and awe. "How did you know that?" The hand on Izuku's shoulder was less a grip and more an anchor, rooting him to the spot. It didn't squeeze or crush. It simply was, an undeniable fact of physics he had no hope of countering. He felt a tremor run through the arm, a subtle vibration of exhaustion and barely suppressed power that traveled all the way down to his own trembling frame. He turned fully, his neck stiff, to face the young man. Up close, the intensity of his presence was overwhelming. The air around him seemed to hum with residual energy. His blonde hair, still damp from the earlier rain, caught the flashing red and blue lights of the arriving police cars, making it look like a crown of fire and ice. But his eyes were ancient. They were the eyes of a soldier who had seen too much, set in the face of a boy barely out of his teens. I. Izuku's voice was a pathetic squeak. His entire vocabulary, a vast and intricate lexicon of hero trivia and strategic analysis, had abandoned him, leaving behind only the stammers of a terrified child. The young hero's gaze was sharp, cutting through Izuku's fear like a scalpel. "You're not with the police. You're not a pro. You're a civilian. A kid." Each statement was a quiet, damning fact. "So I'll ask you one more time." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone that was far more intimidating than any shout. "How did you know?" Before Izuku could formulate an answer, another figure pushed through the growing crowd of officials. A man in a rumpled trench coat with tired eyes and a perpetually weary expression approached them. Izuku recognized him as Detective Tsukachi Naomasa, a rising star in the force known for his uncanny ability to get confessions. His quirk was rumored to be a form of human lie detector. "Alright, that's enough," Tsukachi said, his voice calm but firm, addressing the blonde hero. "He's a civilian child. Let him go. We'll take his statement." The hero didn't release his grip. He didn't even look at the detective. His eyes remained locked on Izuku. "This is different. He's with me." Tsukachi's eyebrows shot up. "With you? Who are you? You're not registered. You caused millions in property damage. You're in a mountain of trouble, son." The hero finally turned his head, a flash of annoyance crossing his features. "The villain is stopped. The civilians are safe. The rest is paperwork." He then looked back down at Izuku, the full weight of his attention returning. "We're leaving." It wasn't a request. Panic seized Izuku. "Wait, my mom! I have to get home. This will only take a minute." The hero interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. And then, before Izuku could protest further, he acted. He shifted his grip from Izuku's shoulder to his arm, securing him tightly. He crouched, muscles coiling. "Hey! What are you?" Tsukachi shouted, lunging forward, but it was like trying to catch lightning. There was a boom of displaced air, a kick of dust and debris from the cracked pavement. The world dissolved into a vertiginous blur for Izuku. The feeling of his stomach trying to exit through his throat was followed by an immense, crushing pressure. They shot upwards, the sounds of the plaza, the sirens, the shouts, fading away in an instant. The wind roared past his ears, and the city lights became a glittering, sprawling tapestry below. It was terrifying and, for a fleeting, traitorous moment, utterly exhilarating. Their ascent was brief. They landed with a jarring thud on a flat, gravel-covered surface, the impact solid enough to make Izuku's teeth rattle. He stumbled, his legs like jelly, and fell to his knees, gasping for air. He was on a rooftop, slick with rain and crisscrossed with pipes and ventilation units that hissed steam into the chilly night air. The city spread out around them, a breathtaking panorama of light and shadow, but Izuku could only stare at the gritty tar beneath his hands, his mind struggling to catch up. "Get up!" the hero commanded. He hadn't even been winded by the jump. He stood silhouetted against the glow of the city, a lonely, powerful figure. Izuku shakily pushed himself to his feet, pulling his worn yellow backpack tighter against his chest as if it were a shield. His initial terror was now being overlaid with a frantic, buzzing layer of analytical awe. The power required for a vertical jump like that, carrying a passenger, the trajectory control was perfect. He avoided all power lines and antennae. He knew exactly where he was going. This isn't just raw power, there's skill there, however unrefined. "All right," the hero said, crossing his arms. The posture was defensive, closed off. "No police. No crowds. Just you and me. Talk. Now. Who are you working for?" "And nobody," Izuku stammered, shrinking back. "I'm not working for anybody. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a student at Aldera Junior High. I swear." "A student?" The hero's expression was deeply skeptical. "A student just happened to be in the right place, at the right time, with the exact piece of tactical intelligence needed to defeat a villain that had 4 pro-heroes stumped." "Unlikely. I just noticed a pattern." Izuku's voice gained a sliver of confidence as he shifted to familiar ground, analysis. "He wasn't controlling all the metal, just some of it. I saw him touch the bus stop and the street sign before he could manipulate them, but he hadn't touched the lamppost. I cross-referenced that with the fact that the girders he used at the beginning were no longer moving. It suggested a quirk with a time-limited, contact-based activation requirement." The words tumbled out of him, a torrent of nervous energy. The hero's stony expression flickered. A hint of surprise. "You figured that out, just by watching?" "I analyze things. It's what I do. It's my hobby." In a moment of desperate honesty, Izuku shrugged off his backpack, fumbled with the zipper, and pulled out his pride and joy, the source of all his schoolyard misery, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 5. He held it out with trembling hands, a peace offering. "It's all in here." The hero stared at the notebook as if it might be a bomb. It looked pathetic, really. A cheap, spiral-bound notebook, its cover slightly warped and stained with rainwater. The All Might sticker on the corner, a rare piece of merchandise from the hero's early, obscure days in America, was peeling. Cautiously, as if expecting a trick, he took it. His large, callous fingers seemed to dwarf the small notebook. He flipped it open, his expression still guarded. He scanned the first page, a detailed breakdown of Captain Shield's abilities and weaknesses. His eyebrow twitched. He flipped again. A diagram of the Watercork hero's support gear, with Izuku's own handwritten suggestions for improving nozzle pressure and flow rate. He kept flipping, the pages turning faster and faster. His skepticism slowly melted away, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He saw complex analyses of fighting styles, theoretical quirk applications, and painstakingly detailed drawings that bordered on architectural blueprints. This wasn't the idle doodling of a fan. This was high-level tactical analysis. Then he stopped. He froze on a page that was clearly more worn than the others, the paper softened by repeated handling. Izuku knew the page by heart. It was his section on Nana Shimura. The hero's breath hitched. His gaze was fixed on Izuku's drawing of her, the one copy from the grainy microfiche. Izuku had tried to capture her smile, the sheer force of her hopeful energy. Beside it were notes, quotes from old interviews, and Izuku's own theories about her true power and the principles she fought for. Her smile wasn't just for the cameras. One of his notes read, "It was a weapon against despair. A strategic tool." The young man's hand, the one not holding the notebook, clenched into a fist at his side. He slowly, almost reverently, reached out with his thumb and traced the outline of Nana's face in the drawing. A wave of profound, gut-wrenching sorrow washed over his features, so raw and unguarded that it made Izuku flinch. In that instant, the terrifying demigod vanished, and all Izuku could see was a young man grieving. Someone who was deeply, terribly alone. He looked up from the notebook, his blue eyes shimmering with a film of unshed tears. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a raw, searching vulnerability. "Why her?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Most people have forgotten her. How could anyone forget her?" Izuku replied, his own voice softening. His fear had evaporated, replaced by his natural empathy. She was what a hero is supposed to be. She didn't just fight villains, she protected people. She made them feel safe. Even when things were scary, her smile, it made you believe it would be okay. He trailed off, feeling a blush creep up his neck. I just think she was amazing." The hero stared at him for a long, silent moment, the city's hum the only sound between them. He closed the notebook with a soft snap and handed it back to Izuku. His entire demeanor had changed. The aggressive, intimidating posture was gone. Now, he just looked tired. So incredibly tired. "She was," he said quietly, a universe of pain packed into those two words. He turned and walked to the edge of the rooftop, looking out over the sprawling lights. "This fight, it's not as simple as beating up thugs in alleys. There are monsters out there, Midoriya. Real ones. Monsters that devour light and hope. I'm fighting a war most people don't even know exists, a war I inherited." He didn't turn around, but Izuku could hear the weight in his voice. "I made a promise to her. That I would end it. That I would become a symbol that could shoulder everyone's fears, so they wouldn't have to. A pillar of peace." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "But look at me. I'm just a hammer. I see a nail, and I smash it. Tonight, I almost smashed everything. The villain, the cage, the people inside. I saw no other way." He finally turned, his eyes locking with Izuku's. "But you did." Izuku's heart ached. He was looking at a legend in its infancy, a powerhouse drowning in the responsibility that came with his power. He wasn't a polished symbol of peace. He was just a boy, not much older than Izuku himself, who had been handed a burden too heavy for any single person to carry. And he was carrying it alone. "You're not just a hammer," Izuku said, his voice finding a new strength. "Power is a tool. You need to learn how to use it for more than just breaking things. You can use it to build, to protect. You just need a plan." A faint smile, the first Izuku had seen, touched the hero's lips. It was small and sad, but it was there. "A plan? I've never been very good at those." He sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of the world. He seemed to come to a decision. It was impulsive, reckless even, but it was born from a place of desperation and a glimmer of newfound hope. He reached into a reinforced pocket on his tracksuit trousers and pulled out a thin, slightly battered manila folder. It was stamped with the official seal of the Muzutafu Police Department, and the word, "Cold Case," in stark red letters. He held it out to Izuku. "You like to analyze things. Analyze this." Izuku took the folder, his fingers trembling slightly. He opened it. Inside were police reports, a grainy photograph of a nondescript man, and witness testimonies. The name on the file was Phantom Limb. The details were sparse. Over a period of 2 years, a series of high-level, non-violent crimes had been committed, disabling security systems, creating traffic diversions, rerouting corporate funds. The perpetrator was never seen, never left a trace. It was as if a ghost were pulling the strings. The case had gone cold a year ago. "The police gave up on it," the hero said. "They decided he was gone, or that the cases were unrelated. I don't believe it. There's a piece missing, something no one is seeing." He looked at Izuku, his gaze serious. "You see things others miss. So see what you can find." Just then, a loud, static-filled squawk erupted from a device on the hero's belt. It was a chunky, durable-looking communicator, clearly built for harsh conditions. He tapped it, and a grizzled, angry voice shot out of the speaker. "Tashinori, you absolute moron!" The hero, Tashinori, winced, holding the device away from his ear. Gran Torino, now's not the best. Don't you Gran Torino me! The voice barked. It was reedy but full of surprising power. I just saw the preliminary damage report. A 5-block radius of shattered windows. The city is calling it a localized seismic event. Are you trying to be a hero or a natural disaster? Nana would be ashamed of your carelessness. Toshinori's expression hardened at the mention of his mentor. I stopped the villain. You got lucky. And I heard from Scotchy. You ran off with a civilian witness. A child. Have you lost what little mind you have left? Who is he? Is he one of his agents sent to gain your trust? You can't trust anyone, Toshinori. I taught you that. He's not an agent, Toshinori said, his voice low and firm. He glanced at Izuku, who was trying his best to look small and invisible. He's something else. Something else is going to get you killed. Gran Torino shot back. You're powerful, but you're a fool. You wear your heart on your sleeve, and that grief of yours makes you reckless. Cut this kid loose, now. Fight your battles alone. It's safer. There was a long pause. Toshinori looked from the communicator in his hand to Izuku, who stood clutching the cold case file like a holy text. He looked at the boy's wide, intelligent eyes, filled not with fear anymore, but with a burning curiosity. He thought of the notebook, of the analysis, of the scream that had saved him from making an unforgivable mistake. Alone was how he'd been operating. And alone had almost led to disaster. I'll call you back, Toshinori said, his voice betraying none of his internal conflict. He cut the connection before the old hero could protest further, plunging the rooftop back into relative silence. He slid the communicator back onto his belt and let out a long, weary sigh. He looked at Izuku, a new resolve in his eyes. Don't listen to him. Just look at the file. There's a burner phone number on the inside. Contact me on it if you find anything. Don't call the police. Don't talk to anyone else. Just me. And with that, he prepared to leave. Wait. Izuku called out. How do I get down? Toshinori paused, a flicker of sheepishness on his face. He'd clearly forgotten that part. Right. He strode over, and before Izuku could prepare himself, he was scooped up, the file held tight against his chest. Hold on, was all the warning he got. The world lurched again, and they were falling. It wasn't the terrifying free fall Izuku expected, but a controlled descent, the wind whistling past them. They landed gently in a darkened alleyway 2 blocks from Izuku's apartment building. Go home, Midoriya, Toshinori said, setting him down. And be careful. Without another word, he crouched and launched himself back into the night sky, a fading thunderbolt against the moonless sky. Izuku stood alone in the alley, his heart a symphony of terror and elation, the cold case file feeling like the heaviest, most important thing he had ever held. The next 2 days were a blur of obsessive focus for Izuku. He told his worried mother a half-truth, that he'd been held late by police for a witness statement, and his phone battery had died. It was flimsy, but her relief at seeing him safe overrode her suspicion. He barely slept. He barely ate. The world outside the cold case file ceased to exist. His schoolwork was forgotten. The bullies in the hallways were insignificant ghosts. His entire being was focused on the puzzle Toshinori had given him. He turned his small bedroom into a command center. The floor was covered in maps of the city. He'd spent his life savings, all 5,000 yen of it, on printing public records at the library. He had timelines of the Phantom Limb, crimes taped to his wall, interconnected with pieces of red string like a madman in a detective movie. He started where the police had left off. Phantom Limb was a ghost. No witnesses, no forensics, no motive. The crimes were elegant in their simplicity. A security company's server would crash for exactly 3 minutes, allowing for a data theft at a rival corporation. A series of traffic lights would malfunction, creating a perfect, clear getaway route for a jewelry store heist across town. A localized power grid failure would knock out the alarms in a warehouse just before it was emptied of valuable electronics. The police saw them as separate, sophisticated crimes. Izuku saw something else. He wasn't looking at the crimes themselves. He was looking at the negative space around them. He spent the first day just digitizing everything, creating a spreadsheet. Dates, times, locations, methods. He cross-referenced the phantom limb incidents with a public database of all reported crimes in Muzidafu for the same period. That's when he found the first thread. The power grid failure that phantom limb was suspected of causing happened at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. At 2:20 a.m., 3 blocks away, a completely unrelated robbery took place at a high-tech components warehouse. The police report for the robbery mentioned the alarms were inexplicably offline. They blamed it on the blackout, a freak coincidence. Izuku's hands trembled as he typed. Coincidence? He kept digging. The traffic light malfunction that cleared a 4-block stretch of road? It happened at the exact time a known gang of smash-and-grab robbers hit a luxury watch store. Their escape had been famously easy, with police patrols snarled in the phantom traffic jam a mile away. The official report chalked it up to luck. The pattern emerged, stark and terrifying. Phantom Limb wasn't the thief. He wasn't the robber. He was the enabler. He was a logistical support specialist for other villains. He created the opportunities, the perfect windows for others to commit their crimes. He wasn't a ghost. He was the shadow that let the other monsters dance unseen. This was why he was never caught. The police were looking at the main event, the robbery, the heist, while the true mastermind was orchestrating the overture 3 blocks away and was gone before the curtain even rose. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a cold case about a single, clever villain. This was the first hint of a coordinated network, a criminal underworld that wasn't just chaotic and opportunistic, but organized. Managed. His mind flashed back to Tashinori's words on the rooftop. A war most people don't even know exists. This was it. A piece of it. He worked through the night, fueled by cheap instant coffee and a burning sense of purpose. He mapped it all out. Every phantom limb incident was a prelude to another, more direct crime. He drew lines, connected the dots, until his wall looked like a mad conspiracy theorist's dream. But it wasn't a theory. The data was undeniable. By dawn on the 3rd day, he had it. A comprehensive report, bound in a new notebook, Project Thunderbolt, Volume 1, detailing his findings. He outlined Phantom Limb's methodology, linked him to 17 different solved and unsolved crimes, and even managed to triangulate a probable area of operation based on the cellular and electrical infrastructure he most frequently targeted. He had turned a cold case into the blueprint of a criminal conspiracy. He was exhausted, his eyes gritty and red, but he had never felt more alive. He pulled out the burner phone Tashinori had given him, a simple, untraceable flip phone. With trembling fingers, he dialed the number scrawled on the inside of the folder. It rang twice. Yes? Tashinori's voice was tense, guarded. It's Midoriya, Izuku said, his own voice hoarse from disuse. I found something. I think it's bigger than you thought. There was a pause on the other end. Where are you? Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, Izuku said, naming a notoriously polluted and deserted stretch of coastline. It was the safest, most isolated place he could think of. By the west entrance. At sunset. I'll be there. The line went dead. Izuku spent the rest of the day in a daze, cleaning his room and hiding all evidence of his work. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, he walked to the designated meeting spot. The park was a monument to neglect. Piles of illegally dumped trash, old appliances, broken furniture, bags of refuse, formed small mountains that stretched down to the shoreline. The air smelled of salt and decay. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting. Izuku sat on a broken refrigerator, his new notebook held tightly in his lap, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. There was no thunderous arrival this time. Tashinori simply appeared, walking out from behind a mountain of tires as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, looking less like a hero and more like a tired college student. Midoriya, he said, his voice neutral. He stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. You said you found something? Izuku's nerves returned, but he pushed them down. This wasn't a fan meeting a hero. This was a strategist delivering a briefing. He stood up and opened his notebook. Phantom Limb isn't a primary actor, Izuku began, his voice gaining confidence as he recited his findings. He's a support specialist. A facilitator. I've correlated 14 of his suspected incidents with other, more direct criminal acts occurring simultaneously within a 3 to 5 block radius. He creates systemic openings, power outages, communication jams, traffic disruptions, that allow other villainous parties to operate with a near-zero chance of immediate response or capture. He showed Toshinori the charts, the timelines, the maps. He explained the patterns, the methodology, the sheer audacity of the network he'd uncovered. Toshinori listened in absolute silence, his expression unreadable. He took the notebook from Izuku and slowly paged through it, his eyes scanning the detailed analysis. He spent a long time looking at the final map, where Izuku had highlighted a small, industrial sector of the city as Phantom Limb's likely base of operations. When he finally looked up, the setting sun cast his face in deep shadow, but Izuku could see the look in his eyes. It was the same look he'd had on the rooftop when he'd first seen the notebook, a look of profound, world-altering shock. He wasn't just impressed by a smart kid's hobby anymore. He was looking at a weapon. An invaluable, irreplaceable strategic tool, a support network. Toshinori breathed, the implications washing over him. All this time, we've been fighting the symptoms, not the disease. We've been swatting at puppets while the puppeteer hides in the wings. He looked from the notebook back to Izuku, and for the first time, Izuku saw a flicker of genuine, undiluted hope in his eyes. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. The burden on his shoulders seemed, for just a moment, a little lighter. You did this in 2 days, Toshinori stated, not a question but a confirmation. Izuku just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Toshinori closed the notebook and handed it back. He then looked Izuku straight in the eye, his gaze piercing and serious. The dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. The suspicion was gone, the hero worship was fading. There were two people staring at the same abyss, from different sides, and realizing they needed each other to cross it. My mentor was right, Toshinori said, his voice low. I am reckless. I am a fool. And I cannot win this fight alone. He took a deep breath. I need your help, Midoriya Izuku. Not just for cold cases, for everything. I have the power. But you have the plans. It wasn't a request. It was a plea. An admission of vulnerability from the strongest man Izuku had ever met. It was the beginning of an alliance that no one could have predicted. The boy with all the brains and no power, and the boy with all the power and no one to guide him. Okay, Izuku whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He clutched his notebook to his chest, the salt-laced wind whipping around them. Okay, together, standing amidst the forgotten refuse of their city, they watched as the last light of day was swallowed by the night. A new age was dawning, and they were the only two who knew it was coming. The address Toshinori had sent to the burner phone led Izuku to a place that was the very definition of urban anonymity. It was a drab, beige apartment building from a bygone architectural era, wedged between a laundromat that smelled perpetually of burned soap and a shuttered bookstore whose faded sign promised worlds of wonder. There were no discerning features, no security cameras, nothing to mark it as anything other than one of 1,000 identical buildings where people lived quiet, unremarkable lives. It was the perfect place to hide a secret. Izuku checked the address, apartment 3B, for the 10th time, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He clutched his notebook, the one now labeled Project Thunderbolt, as if it were a holy relic. He had spent the last 12 hours in a state of suspended animation, waiting for this moment, his mind replaying the meeting at Dagoba Beach on an endless loop. I need your help, Midoriya Izuku. The words echoed in his head, a terrifying and exhilarating refrain. He climbed the echoing concrete stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled of dust, old tea, and something sharp and electric, like the air after a lightning strike. He found the door to 3B, a plain, featureless slab of wood with a tarnished brass number. He raised a trembling hand and knocked 3 times, just as he'd been instructed. The door was not opened. It was simply gone. One moment it was there, and the next it vanished with a blur of motion and a soft whoosh of displaced air, revealing a short, wizened old man standing where the door had been. He was dressed in a simple yellow jumpsuit with a large collar and a domino mask, his cape slung over one shoulder. His face was a road map of wrinkles, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, bored into Izuku with unnerving intensity. Izuku froze, his mind instantly supplying the data. Hero name, Gran Torino. Quirk, Jet. Veteran second-generation hero. Contemporary of Nana Shimura. Famously reclusive, known for high-speed, ricochet-based combat. Before Izuku could even stammer a greeting, Gran Torino moved. He wasn't just fast. He was a law of physics unto himself. He zipped past Izuku, a yellow blur that circled the boy twice before coming to an abrupt, perfect stop directly in front of him, close enough for Izuku to feel the heat radiating from his suit. He hadn't just moved, he had inspected every inch of Izuku, his senses honed by decades of combat. "He's clean!" Gran Torino grunted, his voice reedy but carrying an undeniable authority. He pointed a thumb over his shoulder, back into the apartment. "But he's a twig. A strong wind would snap him in two." "What are you thinking, Toshinori?" Izuku peeked past the old hero. The apartment was as Spartan as the building's exterior. A single table, 3 mismatched chairs, a small kitchenette with a humming refrigerator, and a window with the blinds drawn tight. And sitting at the table, looking impossibly large in the small space, was Toshinori. He wasn't wearing his tracksuit, but a simple black t-shirt and jeans. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes were fixed on Izuku with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "He's not here to fight, Master," Toshinori said, his voice a low rumble. "He's here to think. Come in, Midoriya." "Sit down." Izuku scurried inside, his legs feeling unsteady. Gran Torino shut the door with a decisive click, the sound sealing them inside the quiet, tense space. The old hero leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his gaze never leaving Izuku. It was like being examined by a hawk. "So," Gran Torino began, his tone dripping with skepticism. "You're the brat who figured out the Phantom Limb case. The ghost who kept Toshinori from leveling a city block. I just noticed some things," Izuku mumbled, taking a seat opposite Toshinori. He placed his notebook on the table between them. "He notices things," Gran Torino repeated, his voice laced with scorn. "Toshinori, this is madness. We're fighting a war that has claimed the greatest heroes of our generation, and you want to bring a child into it? A quirkless child, no less? He's a liability. A weakness. A target. He's an asset," Toshinori countered, his voice firm. He slid Izuku's notebook across the table toward his old master. "Look at it. Read what he found." He saw connections the entire police force missed for 2 years. He did it in 2 days. Gran Torino snorted but took the notebook. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from derision to grudging interest, and finally to a thoughtful, stony silence. He read every word, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Toshinori used the silence to speak directly to Izuku. "Midoriya, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. It's not a hero's secret. It's the most dangerous piece of knowledge in the world. It's the reason heroes like Nana Shimura die. It's the reason I fight." He leaned forward, his large hands resting on the table. "You are a quirk analyst. You understand that quirks are biological phenomena. They're passed down genetically, they manifest, they have limits. But what if I told you there was a quirk that breaks all those rules? A quirk that can be passed from one person to another like a torch?" Izuku's eyes widened. His analytical mind, which had always operated within the known laws of quirk science, suddenly slammed into a wall. "Passed on? Like inherited? That's impossible. A quirk is tied to an individual's DNA, their specific biological factors. To transfer a quirk would require rewriting a person's genetic code on a cellular level. The energy transference alone." He started muttering, his mind racing through possibilities, each more fantastical than the last. "It's possible," Toshinori said, cutting through Izuku's rapid-fire analysis. "Because it has been done. 8 times. I am the 8th wielder of this power." He paused, letting the weight of the statement land. "It's called One for All." One for All. The name was simple, but it resonated with a kind of mythic power. Izuku stared, speechless. "It is the sacred duty of the wielder to cultivate this power, and then pass it on to a worthy successor, to stand against a great evil," Toshinori continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It is a stockpiling quirk. With each transfer, the raw power of the previous user is integrated, growing stronger with every generation. It is a sacred vow made manifest as power. Izuku could only shake his head in awe. A quirk that grew stronger over time, passed down through a lineage of heroes. It was the stuff of legends. It explained Toshinori's incredible, overwhelming power. It explained why he seemed so much stronger than any other hero Izuku had ever analyzed. But a great evil? Izuku asked, his voice hushed. What evil could be so great that it requires this? Gran Torino slammed the notebook shut, the sound making Izuku jump. The old hero's face was grim, all traces of mockery gone. Every light casts a shadow, kid. Every story has its villain. One for All was not born in a vacuum. It was created to fight one man. Toshinori picked up the story, his expression darkening. He is the boogeyman of the underworld. The demon lord that all other villains secretly fear. He has lived for over a century, since the dawn of quirks. His name is All for One. The name hung in the air, cold and heavy. Izuku felt a shiver of recognition. It was the name he'd seen whispered in forums, the redacted word in old police reports. It was real. His quirk is the opposite of mine, Toshinori explained, his fists clenching on the table. Where one for all is given, his is taken. He can steal quirks from others, stockpiling them for himself. He can even grant these stolen quirks to others, creating loyal followers and sowing chaos. He is the original puppet master. The criminal empire you uncovered with Phantom Limb? It's just one thread in his vast dark web. Izuku felt sick. A man who could steal what made people unique, what made them special. It was the ultimate violation. A world where your very identity could be ripped away from you. He is the one who killed my master. Toshinori's voice was thick with a grief that was still raw, still bleeding. He killed Nana Shimura. The room fell silent. Toshinori's gaze became distant, his eyes unfocused as he was pulled back into the depths of his own memory. The air in the small apartment grew heavy, and the world outside the window seemed to fade away, replaced by the ghost of a ruin-strewn battlefield. Flashback. 7 years ago, the world was fire and smoke. The sky over the coastline was a bruised purple, choked with ash from the burning industrial complex. The air tasted of ozone and burning plastic. A 15-year-old Toshinori Yagi knelt on the cracked earth, his UA gym uniform torn and bloodied. His body screamed in protest. Every muscle ached, and a deep, throbbing pain resonated from his left arm, which he was sure was broken. He was gasping for breath, trying to draw air into lungs that felt like they'd been scoured with sandpaper. He had tried to help. He'd had one for all for less than a year, a secret passed to him by his mentor, the woman he admired more than anyone in the world. He had seen her in trouble, cornered by the monsters she had been hunting for years, and he had charged in, full of righteous fury and a foolish belief in his own nascent power. He had lasted less than 10 seconds. All for One hadn't even treated him like a threat. He'd swatted him aside like an insect, a flick of a finger unleashing a concussive force that had sent him tumbling through the air, crashing through a brick wall. The casual, dismissive nature of the attack was more terrifying than any overt display of malice. Toshi! Stay down! The voice belonged to Nana Shimura. She stood between him and the shadowy figure of All for One. Her hero costume was ripped, her face was smudged with soot and blood, but she stood tall. Her signature smile was gone, replaced by a grim, desperate line. Power, a gentle green aura, pulsed around her, but it was flickering, faltering. Beside her, a younger, less wrinkled Gran Torino was a whirlwind of motion, his jet quirk turning him into an unpredictable yellow projectile. He was trying to create an opening, to land a blow on the monstrous figure who stood calmly amidst the destruction. All for One was a nightmare given form. He wore a simple, dark suit, but his head was a mass of scar tissue, his face obscured by a life support mask that hissed with every breath. He radiated an aura of ancient, patient evil. He wasn't fighting, he was playing. Such loyalty, Nana! All for One's voice was a synthesized baritone, calm and conversational, which made it all the more chilling. And such poor judgment in protégés. This one is all raw power and no control. He'll destroy himself before he ever becomes a threat. Leave him out of this! Nana shouted, launching herself forward. She was fast, a streak of hope against the bleak landscape. But All for One simply raised a hand. Tendrils of red and black energy shot from his fingertips, wrapping around Nana's limbs and slamming her into the ground. No! Toshinori screamed, trying to get up, but his body wouldn't obey. Gran Torino shot in, using his momentum to kick the tendrils, forcing All for One to release her. Sorihiko! Get him out of here! Now! Nana ordered, staggering to her feet. Her voice was strained, her breathing ragged. She knew. They all knew. This was a battle she could not win. I'm not leaving you, Nana! Gran Torino yelled back, landing beside her. That's an order, old friend, she said, her voice softening for a moment. She looked at them, at her oldest friend and her young, hopeful successor. She forced a smile onto her lips. It was weak, trembling, but it was there. It was for them. You two have to live, she said, her voice full of a terrible finality. The flame has been passed. You have to protect it. You have to run. She then turned to Toshinori, her eyes locking with his. The love and belief in her gaze were a physical blow. Toshinori, don't chase vengeance. Chase a better world. Be the symbol they need, a symbol that saves people with a smile, no matter how scared you are. Her own smile widened, becoming genuine, radiant, even as tears streamed down her face. Remember that, Toshi. The world needs to see you smile. Before either of them could argue, she turned her back on them. She faced All for One, her faltering green aura flaring to life one last time, a defiant star against the encroaching darkness. Run! She screamed. Gran Torino didn't hesitate. He knew the weight of her command. He grabbed the front of Toshinori's torn uniform and, with a powerful blast from his feet, launched them both backwards, away from the fight. Toshinori fought against his grip, screaming Nana's name, his voice raw with anguish and helplessness. He watched, his heart shattering, as Nana charged the monster one last time. He saw All for One raise his hand, a terrible, complex array of quirks activating, swirling into a vortex of annihilating energy. There was a blinding flash of light that bleached the world white, followed by a wave of force that shook the very foundations of the earth. When Toshinori's vision cleared, there was nothing left. Just a smoking crater where the two titans had stood. Nana Shimura was gone. The scream that ripped itself from Toshinori's throat was not that of a boy or a hero. It was the sound of a soul being torn in two. In that moment, kneeling in the dirt miles away from the battle, grief and rage and a terrible, crushing guilt forged a new vow in his heart. He would not just chase a better world. He would scour this one clean. He would find All for One. And he would destroy him. The memory receded, leaving the silence of the apartment in its wake. Toshinori was staring at his own hands, his knuckles white. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, a silent testament to a wound that had never healed. Izuku felt like he couldn't breathe. The story hadn't just been told, he had felt it. He had seen the weight of that legacy settle onto Toshinori's young shoulders, a weight that would eventually curve his spine and limit his power. He finally understood the sadness in Toshinori's eyes, the reckless fury in his punches. He wasn't just a hero fighting for justice. He was a son trying to avenge his mother. Gran Torino broke the silence, his voice rough with his own ancient grief. Now you see, kid. This isn't a game. It's not about fame or flashy moves. It's about survival. It's about keeping that monster from swallowing the world whole. Toshinori is the only one with enough power to face him. And my job is to make sure he lives long enough to do it. A job I failed with Nana. The guilt in his voice was a palpable thing. That's why I don't want you anywhere near this. You're a vulnerability. A weakness All for One can and will exploit. The old hero's words were harsh, but Izuku understood them. He looked at Toshinori, at the immense burden he carried alone. He thought about his own life, the bullying, the scorn, the constant feeling of being useless, of being a blank. He had spent his entire life on the sidelines, analyzing the game, wishing he could play. And now, here it was. The most important game in the world, laid bare before him. He was being told, logically and correctly, that he had no place in it. That he would only get in the way. That he was a liability. The old Izuku would have agreed. He would have apologized, curled into a ball, and run away. But something had shifted in him since that night in the plaza. He had screamed. He had made a difference. He had held a cold case file and torn it wide open. He wasn't just a fan anymore. He was a participant. He took a deep breath, his fear and awe crystallizing into something hard and clear, resolve. He looked directly at Gran Torino, his green eyes steady. "You're right," the admission surprised both heroes. "I am a weakness," Izuku continued, his voice gaining strength. "If All for One finds out about me, he'll use me to get to Tashinori-san. I have no quirk. I can't fight. I can't defend myself. Physically, I am a liability in every sense of the word." He then turned his gaze to Tashinori, and his expression softened with an empathy that was far older than his years. "But you're wrong about one thing. Tashinori-san isn't just a hammer, and he's not fighting this alone. Not anymore." He stood up, his small frame seeming to possess a new, unshakable core of strength. "I've spent my entire life being told what I can't do. That a quirkless person can't be a hero. That I should just give up, and maybe you're right. Maybe I can't be a hero like him." He gestured to Tashinori. "I can't be the one to stand in the sun and throw the punches." He squared his shoulders, a fire in his eyes that neither of them had seen before. "But I can watch from the shadows. I can analyze the enemy. I can find their weaknesses, predict their movements, and build the strategies that will let him win. I can load the gun, check the wind, and point him at the target. I can be the shield that protects his back and the compass that guides his fist. All for One might be a monster, and One for All might be a miracle, but this is still a fight. And every fight, no matter how big, can be won with the right plan." He looked back at Tashinori, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but filled with an unshakable conviction. "You inherited a great power. But you also inherited a great burden. You don't have to carry it by yourself. I can't take the weight from you, but I can help you stand beneath it." He took a breath, his voice ringing with the truth of his vow. "You are not alone anymore." The silence that followed was different. It was not tense or heavy with grief. It was filled with a stunned, fragile hope. Tashinori stared at Izuku, his blue eyes wide. He saw not a fan, not a liability, but a partner. Someone who understood not just his power, but his pain. Someone who wasn't offering to fight alongside him, but to think for him, to plan for him, to be the part of him that grief and rage had blunted. Gran Torino let out a long, slow breath. He looked at the fiery determination in the boy's eyes, at the unbreakable resolve. He saw a flicker of Nana's own stubborn spirit in this quirkless child. The kid was a twig, yes. But his mind was a fortress. And his spirit was forged from steel. Humph! The old hero grunted, turning away to hide the grudging respect in his eyes. "Fine." The word was quiet, but it was a surrender. "The boy has a point, Tashinori. Your head-on approach is going to get you killed. You need a strategist. Someone detached." He shot a glare at Izuku. "But you listen to me, brat. Your life is no longer your own. From now on, you live in the shadows. No friends, no glory, no mistakes. Your one and only job is to keep him alive and pointed in the right direction. If your strategies get him killed, I'll find a way to haunt you." It was the closest thing to a blessing Izuku was going to get. Tashinori finally stood up, a genuine, small smile touching his lips. It was the first one Izuku had seen that wasn't tinged with sadness. It was a smile of relief. Then it settled. The alliance was formalized, not with a handshake, but with a shared, silent understanding in a dusty, anonymous apartment. Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless analyst, accepted his new role. He would not be the hero in the spotlight. He would be the unseen gear in the machine, the ghost in the network, the man in the chair. He would be Tashinori's mind, just as Tashinori would be his sword. Tashinori picked up Izuku's notebook from the table. He opened it back to the first page, to the plan Izuku had laid out for dismantling Phantom Limb's network. "This is where we start," Tashinori said, his voice now imbued with a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a grieving avenger. He was a hero with a plan. We don't go after all for one. Not yet. We start by taking his toys away. We start with his network. We start with the shadows. Izuku, Tashinori, and Gran Torino huddled around the small table, the single bare bulb overhead casting long shadows across the room. The three of them, the aging veteran, the grieving powerhouse, and the brilliant, quirkless boy, looked down at the notebook. It was their first battle plan in a war that had been raging for a century. The war had a name. And now, it had a new soldier. The next 3 months were a crucible for both Izuku Midoriya and Tashinori Yagi, forging them into something new, something more than they had been alone. Their lives split onto two parallel, yet deeply interconnected tracks. One path was forged in sweat, pain, and the thunderous roar of power. The other was carved in silence, illuminated by the glow of a computer screen and fueled by caffeine and sheer intellectual force. Tashinori's training under Gran Torino escalated from difficult to borderline torturous. The old hero understood that Tashinori's weakness was not a lack of power, but a lack of control. He had been using one for all like a sledgehammer, relying on its overwhelming force to solve every problem. Gran Torino was determined to teach him to use it like a scalpel, a rapier, and a shield. Their training ground was the blighted landscape of Dagoba Beach. Every morning before dawn, Tashinori would arrive to find Gran Torino waiting, a demonic glint in his eye. "Your movements are too wide, Tashinori!" Gran Torino would bark, ricocheting off a mountain of rusted washing machines like a yellow pinball. "You telegraph every punch a week in advance. A real opponent would be having tea in the next prefecture by the time your fist arrives." He forced Tashinori to fight him while balancing on precarious stacks of debris, teaching him fine muscle control. He made him practice his leaps, not for distance, but for precision, demanding he land on specific, small targets, the top of a discarded television, the edge of a warped metal plate, without shattering them. The most grueling exercise was what Gran Torino called the egg drill. He would give Tashinori a raw egg and command him to hold it in his fist, while activating one for all. The first 50 attempts ended in an instant, messy explosion of yolk and shell. "You're letting the power flood your entire body," Gran Torino criticized, zipping past to flick Tashinori's ear. "One for all is not a floodlight, it's a laser pointer. Focus the energy, channel it only where you need it. To your legs for a jump, to your fists for a punch. Isolate it. Contain it." Slowly, painstakingly, Tashinori began to learn. He started to feel the power not as a raging inferno, but as a current he could direct. He learned to activate it in just his legs for a silent, powerful leap, his upper body remaining perfectly relaxed. He learned to coat his fist in a thin, controlled layer of energy for a precise jab instead of a city block leveling smash. The 51st egg he held didn't explode. It cracked. By the 100th, it remained pristine in his palm, even as green lightning crackled faintly around his knuckles. It was a victory more significant than any villain he had defeated. While Tashinori was conditioning his body, Izuku was conditioning his mind. The Spartan apartment, now dubbed the Nest, became his sanctuary and his laboratory. Gran Torino, using old contacts, had procured a powerful, untraceable computer rig and several monitors. The room, once empty, was now a nexus of information, its walls covered in white boards filled with complex diagrams, network charts, and timelines. Izuku's training was a montage of a different sort. He wasn't lifting weights. He was lifting the veil of secrecy that shrouded the underworld. He spent hundreds of hours teaching himself to code, to navigate the dark web, to understand police encryption protocols, and to analyze city infrastructure schematics. He became a ghost in the machine, his digital footprint a whisper. His hero notebooks changed. They were no longer just theoretical analyses. They were active intelligence files. But his most intense focus was on Tashinori himself. He watched hours of grainy footage of his early, reckless fights, his analytical gaze merciless. "Your fighting style is inefficient," Izuku told Tashinori one evening in the Nest. They were both exhausted, Tashinori's muscles aching from his physical exertion, Izuku's eyes burning from staring at screens. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Toshinori grunted, nursing a bottle of water. Izuku ignored the sarcasm, his mind already deep in the problem. He pointed to a diagram he'd drawn on a whiteboard. It was a stick figure representation of Toshinori, covered in red arrows and notations. You rely too heavily on straight, linear attacks. Your power is immense, but predictable. Gran Torino is teaching you to be faster, more agile, but we need to make you smarter. We need to mitigate your weaknesses. Izuku's first project was support gear. He couldn't build it himself, but he could design it. Using his analysis, he identified key problems. Toshinori's raw power created debilitating shockwaves, and his landings from high-speed jumps were destructive and unstable. We need shock absorption, Izuku explained, showing Toshinori a series of detailed blueprints. I've designed bracers and boots using a composite alloy and a non-Newtonian fluid layer. In theory, they should absorb and disperse a significant percentage of the kinetic backlash from your punches and landings. It won't just reduce collateral damage, it'll reduce the strain on your own body. It will make you more durable, allow you to fight longer. He had also designed a more robust communication system. A high-frequency earpiece, shielded against electromagnetic pulses, that would allow him to be Toshinori's real-time eyes and ears on the battlefield. Gran Torino, skeptical but intrigued by the sheer detail of Izuku's designs, called in a favor with an old, retired support gear engineer he trusted, a man who owed him his life and knew how to keep his mouth shut. The designs were sent off, and the long, quiet process of fabrication began. The culmination of their 3 months of training was finally at hand. It was time to put their new partnership to the test. It was time to hunt the Phantom Limb. Using Izuku's analysis, they had narrowed Phantom Limb's probable area of operation to a 5-square-block industrial zone near the city's port. It was a place of warehouses, shipping containers, and forgotten factories, a maze of metal and concrete, perfect for a logistical ghost to hide. The plan was not to find Phantom Limb himself. He was too careful. The plan was to catch him in the act. Izuku had been monitoring the underworld chatter, cross-referencing shipping manifests, and known gang activities. He had identified a high-value target, a shipment of advanced circuitry, critical for government and hero agency communications, was due to be stored overnight in a supposedly secure warehouse. Warehouse 7. It's the perfect target, Izuku explained during their final briefing in the nest. The air was thick with tension. High value, low security, and right in his presumed territory, a crew of known tech smugglers called the Glitch Gang has been active in the area. They're the muscle. Phantom Limb will be the one to knock out the security grid. So I go in, find this Phantom, and smash him, Toshinori said, flexing his hand. It was his old instinct, the hammer seeing a nail. No, Izuku said firmly, his voice sharp with the authority he had earned. You are not the hammer tonight. You are the trap. Phantom Limb is cautious. He'll have lookouts, escape routes. If he even senses a hero of your power level in the area, he'll vanish. You can't be seen. He pointed to a map of the warehouse district. The Glitch Gang will move in to secure the cargo once the grid is down. That's our target. We capture them, and we seize their communication equipment. Phantom Limb will be on the other end of that line. If we can capture his signal, I can trace it. We don't catch the ghost. We follow his echo back to its source. And what am I supposed to do? Toshinori asked, a hint of frustration in his voice. He was a being of action, and being told to wait was like trying to leash a thunderstorm. You will be our perimeter, Izuku said, sliding a small, custom-made earpiece across the table. It was the first piece of his new support gear to arrive. You'll be stationed here. He tapped a spot on the map, a tall, abandoned grain silo 3 blocks from the warehouse. It gives you a perfect vantage point of the entire district. You will be my eyes in the sky. I will be in a maintenance van 2 blocks in the other direction, patched into the local comms network. I will guide you. You do not engage unless I give the signal. Your only job is to stop anyone from escaping the net once we spring it. Is that clear? Toshinori looked at the earpiece, then at Izuku's intense, determined face. He nodded slowly. Clear. It was a new way of fighting, one that relied on patience and precision instead of overwhelming force. It felt alien, but he trusted Izuku. He had to. The night was cold and damp, the air heavy with the smell of salt water and diesel. A thick fog rolled in from the port, blanketing the warehouse district in a soft, gray shroud that muffled sound and distorted light. It was perfect weather for ghosts. Izuku sat in the back of a nondescript, dark blue maintenance van, the kind that was so common it was invisible. The interior was a cramped, humming nest of electronics. A bank of monitors displayed scrolling code, security camera feeds he'd discreetly hijacked, and a digital map of the area. He wore a simple black hoodie, the hood pulled up, his face illuminated only by the pale blue glow of the screens. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, student. He was Oracle, the code name he and Tashinori had agreed upon. Oracle to Titan, do you copy? Izuku spoke softly into his headset microphone. Loud and clear. Tashinori's voice crackled in his ear. Titan was his own code name. This is strange. I feel like I'm in a spy movie. Izuku could see him through a high-powered camera he had monitoring the grain silo. Tashinori, Titan, was a dark silhouette perched at the top, a silent, powerful gargoyle watching over the concrete maze below. He wore a dark, form-fitting version of his training suit, designed to blend in with the shadows. Just keep your eyes open, Izuku said. Report any movement near Warehouse 7. For an hour, there was nothing but the rhythmic hiss of the fog and the distant groan of container ships. It was a tense, drawn-out silence that frayed the nerves. Izuku's fingers flew across his keyboard, monitoring network traffic, sweeping for electronic signals. Tashinori remained perfectly still, a monument of patience he hadn't possessed 3 months ago. Then it happened. Oracle, I have movement. Tashinori's voice was a low whisper in his ear. 3 figures, approaching the warehouse from the east. Moving quietly. Dressed in black, that's them. The Glitch Gang. Izuku confirmed, his heart starting to beat faster. He zoomed in on a camera feed near the warehouse, catching a grainy glimpse of the approaching figures. Stand by. They won't move in until the grid is down. He switched his focus to the local power network's digital schematics. He watched the flow of data, the pulse of electricity. He was waiting for the anomaly, the telltale flicker of an outside intrusion. It came at 2:17 a.m. A sudden, sharp dip in the power flowed to Warehouse 7's sector. On his screen, the security systems for the building, the cameras, the motion sensors, the electric fence, all went from green to red. They were offline. Grid is down, Izuku said into his mic. Phantom Limb has made his move. The Glitch Gang will be entering now. I see them, Tashinori confirmed. They're cutting the fence. Moving toward a loading bay door. Let them go in, Izuku instructed. The trap isn't set until they have the merchandise. The longer they're inside, the more comms traffic I can intercept. Izuku's fingers became a blur. He unleashed a packet sniffer program he had written, a digital net designed to catch any stray radio signals in the area. Almost immediately, he got a hit. A heavily encrypted, short-burst frequency. It was a professional job, almost impossible to crack on the fly. But he didn't need to crack it. He just needed to record it. Minutes stretched into an eternity. They're coming out, Oracle, Tashinori reported. They have 2 large crates on an anti-grav dolly. Okay, Titan. It's time, Izuku said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. When they reach the center of the main access road, you move. Your objective is not the smugglers, it is their vehicle. They'll have a transport waiting. Disable it. Create a blockade. And remember the new training. Precision. Not power. Understood. Izuku watched on his monitors as the 3 smugglers wheeled their prize out onto the wide, fog-shrouded road. A large, armored truck, its engine rumbling quietly, pulled out from a side alley to meet them. Now, Titan! Go! From the top of the silo, Tashinori launched himself into the night. It wasn't his old, thunderous leap. It was silent, powerful, and controlled. He soared through the fog, a dark avenger descending from the heavens. He had activated One for All in his legs only, his body cutting through the air with minimal resistance. The Glitch Gang didn't even see him coming until it was too late. Tashinori landed directly on the hood of the armored truck. This time, there was no earth-shattering crater. He channeled the force of his landing downwards through his legs into a single, focused point. The sound was not a boom, but a sharp, metallic crunch. The entire engine block of the truck imploded, a mess of twisted steel and broken pistons. The vehicle jerked to a halt, its headlights flickering and dying. The blockade was in place. The three smugglers froze, spinning around in terror, their petty theft suddenly interrupted by a force of nature. "Heads up, Titan!" Izuku's voice was calm in his ear. "Their leader, the one on the right, has an electrification quirk. The other two are just muscle." Tashinori vaulted off the dead truck, landing lightly on the pavement between the smugglers and their escape route. He stood to his full height, a terrifying figure emerging from the fog. The leader, a wiry man with cybernetic goggles, snarled and thrust his hands forward. Arcs of blue electricity shot from his fingertips, sizzling through the damp air. Tashinori didn't even try to dodge. He simply raised his forearm. He was wearing the new bracer Izuku had designed. The electricity struck the metal surface and, instead of shocking him, was harmlessly dispersed across the alloy plating, grounding out with a fizzle. The smuggler's eyes went wide with disbelief. "What? That's impossible!" "My turn," Tashinori said, his voice a low growl. He moved. Again, it was not a wild charge. It was a single, precise step, covering 10 feet in an instant. He didn't throw a punch. He used an open palm, striking the leader in the chest with just enough force to knock the wind out of him and send him sprawling. The other two, seeing their leader and their vehicle neutralized in seconds, wisely surrendered, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. "Targets neutralized. Vehicle disabled," Tashinori reported, his breathing even. He had expended a minimal amount of energy. It was a clean, efficient victory. "Excellent work, Titan," Izuku praised, a grin spreading across his face in the darkness of the van. "Police are 5 minutes out. I made an anonymous tip. Tie them up and get back to the silo. Do not be seen." As Tashinori dealt with the smugglers, Izuku focused on the real prize. The encrypted signal had cut out the moment the attack began. Phantom Limb was smart. He knew the operation was compromised, but he'd made one mistake. For a brief, 30-second period, while confirming the acquisition of the cargo, his encryption had wavered, a tiny fluctuation as it routed through a secondary server. It was the digital equivalent of a cough in a silent room, and Izuku had heard it. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his mind racing. He rerouted his tracing program through the hole in the encryption he'd found. It was like threading a needle in a hurricane. The code was a labyrinth, full of dead ends and false mirrors. But Izuku navigated it with an instinct he didn't know he possessed. A progress bar appeared on his screen. Trace initiated. 10%. 30%. "Titan, I'm getting close," Izuku said, his voice tense. "I think I've got him." 50%. 70%. The sirens were getting closer. He was running out of time. 90%. Then, a new voice crackled through his headset. It wasn't Tashinori. It was synthesized, calm, and laced with a chilling, almost bored amusement. "Clever. Very clever." Izuku froze, his blood running cold. The voice was coming through the same encrypted channel he was trying to trace. It was Phantom Limb. He was talking directly to him. "I've been monitoring this frequency for unauthorized listeners," the voice continued conversationally. "Never had a bite before. Your software is impressive." "Homebrewed?" Izuku's hands hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed. He was the ghost hunter, but the ghost was now looking back at him. Trace complete. Location acquired. A red dot blinked on his map, pinpointing a location just 4 blocks away. An old, disused cannery at the edge of the pier. "Ah, I see you found me," the voice said, a hint of admiration in its tone. "Well done. But you've made a classic mistake, little ghost. When you stare into the abyss, sometimes the abyss stares back." Suddenly, Izuku's screens went haywire. His tracing program was reversed. A new progress bar appeared, this one bright, angry red. Backtrace initiated. Phantom Limb was using Izuku's own connection to find him. "Titan, he's tracing me! He's going to get my location!" Izuku yelled into the mic, his composure shattering. He frantically tried to build a firewall, to cut the connection, but Phantom Limb's counterattack was elegant and brutally efficient. I have to go! Abort! Izuku slammed his laptop shut, grabbed his gear, and threw open the back doors of the van, ready to bolt. But he was too late. Standing there, bathed in the sickly yellow light of a nearby street lamp, was a figure. It wasn't Phantom Limb. It was something far worse. It was monstrously large, at least 8 feet tall, with thick, gray skin that looked like hardened cement. Its arms were grotesquely long, and its face was a blank slate, with no eyes or nose, only a gaping, bird-like beak where a mouth should be. It was a Nomu. Toshinori's voice screamed in his ear from the silo. Oracle! What is it? What's your status? Izuku couldn't answer. He was frozen in pure, primal terror. This wasn't a common thug. This was a monster from the deepest, darkest pits of All for One's laboratory. From a hidden speaker on the Nomu's shoulder, the calm, synthesized voice of Phantom Limb spoke, its tone now holding a note of finality. It seems you are the one who has been caught in the trap. A shame. You showed promise. The Nomu raised a massive, concrete-like fist. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, a single, terrified thought flashing through his mind. This is it. This is how it ends. Then came the thunder. A sound like the sky cracking open ripped through the night. The Nomu was hit by a blur of motion, a force of such incredible velocity that it was sent flying, crashing through the side of a metal shipping container with a deafening shriek of tearing steel. Toshinori stood where the Nomu had been, his body radiating a furious, brilliant green aura of power. His face was a mask of cold, absolute rage. He had seen the Nomu on his way back, had seen it cornering the van, and had abandoned all pretense of stealth. He had crossed 3 blocks in less than 2 seconds. Get away from him! Toshinori roared, his voice booming with the full, untamed power of One for All. The Nomu extricated itself from the wreckage, seemingly unharmed. It let out a low, guttural screech and charged. The fight was nothing like the clean, precise takedown of the smugglers. This was a brawl of titans. Toshinori met the Nomu's charge with a punch that sent shockwaves through the air, shattering windows for blocks around. The Nomu absorbed the blow, its body showing no sign of damage, and countered with a swipe of its massive claws that forced Toshinori to leap back. They were evenly matched in strength and speed. But the Nomu had a horrifying advantage. It felt no pain. It was a relentless killing machine. Toshinori, for all his power, was still flesh and blood. It has shock absorption! Toshinori yelled, his voice strained as he parried another blow. My smashes aren't working! Izuku, still shaking in the back of the van, forced his terror down. He had to think. Analyze. Don't panic. Analyze. His mind raced, processing the limited data. The Nomu is a bioengineered weapon. All for One gives them multiple quirks. Shock absorption is one. But what are its weaknesses? It's not intelligent. It's following orders. Orders from Phantom Limb. He looked at the cannery, blinking on his still active map. That was the key. Titan! Izuku screamed into his still open comm line. Forget the Nomu. You can't beat it in a head-on fight. The brain is in the cannery. Take out Phantom Limb, and you take out the puppet, Toshinori heard him. He dodged another wild swing from the Nomu, his eyes flicking toward the distant, dark shape of the cannery. It was a gamble. Turning his back on the monster, even for a second, could be fatal. But he trusted his strategist. Cover your ears! Toshinori yelled. He slammed both fists together in front of him. He didn't create a punch. He created a sonic boom. A wave of pure, compressed air erupted outwards. It wasn't a damaging attack, but it was deafening and disorienting. The Nomu staggered back, momentarily stunned. It was the opening he needed. Toshinori didn't run towards the cannery. He jumped. He poured every ounce of his newfound control into his legs, launching himself into a high, soaring arc that took him over the rooftops, a green comet streaking toward his true target. The mission had changed. The strategist's gambit had succeeded, but it had also revealed a far more dangerous foe. They had kicked the hornet's nest, and now the hornets were coming for them. From the perspective of All for One, sitting in his darkened chamber, monitors displaying the chaos at the port. A nervous, well-dressed man, Phantom Limb in the flesh, is bowing before him. "I apologize, Master," Phantom Limb said, his voice no longer synthesized, but trembling with fear. "The operation was a success, but we were compromised. The hero was more powerful than anticipated, and he had help. Someone who bypassed my encryption. A ghost." All for One was not looking at him. His unseen face was tilted toward a screen showing a blurry, zoomed-in image of the maintenance van. He could just make out the shape of a small, terrified boy in a black hoodie. "A hero with the power of one for all is a known quantity. A predictable variable," All for One mused, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. He tapped a finger on the screen, right on Izuku's blurry form. "But this is new. A quirkless boy, intelligent enough to outsmart you and guide the fist of my rival." A slow, chilling smile spread across what was left of his face. He was not angry. He was intrigued. He had spent a century fighting against the brawn of One for All. The prospect of fighting a brain, a truly brilliant one, was a novel and fascinating challenge. "Do not harm the boy," All for One commanded, his voice carrying an unnerving note of delight. "I want to know more about him. A new piece has appeared on the board. A quirkless ghost. How interesting."